There's a very famous Jewish author called Chaim Potok, and this is what he goes on to say. I learned a long time ago, Raven, that a blink of an eye is itself nothing, but the eye that blinks, that is something. A span of life is nothing, but the man who lives that span, he is something. He can fill the tiny span with meaning, so its quality is immeasurable, though its quantity may be insignificant. Do you understand what I am saying? A man must fill his life with meaning, for meaning is not automatically given to life. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request you to please put your hands together for Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, who has consistently, fearlessly, in all the roles that he has played, whether as a bureaucrat or as a politician or as a national leader today, in filling his and countless other lives with meaning, and more important than meaning, knowledge.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to see the star-studded show today for the release of this book. And in a school which brings back my childhood memories, although I didn't go to school here, but my uncle, that is my mother's sister's husband, was a teacher here. And during my summer vacations, I have frequented this place. And I was not born too far from here in Mandavali. So things have changed, but some things have not changed, which should change. I think this hall should be air conditioned. And I can say that if Guru Murthy will permit me, after the new government comes and does not write on it in Indian Express, I will certainly see to it that this hall is air conditioned. I thought the book should have been named as not the decay of the decade, but the decade of decays. I don't, however, demand the resignation of Manmohan Singh. For a very small reason, of course, is that he's a good friend of mine. I feel I shouldn't cause him pain. In the 2G spectrum, he would have gone, but for my stand in the court that he's not responsible for the delay in giving sanction to me on the 2G spectrum matter. He took 1.5 years and still didn't reply. That's not surprising, knowing Manmohan Singh. I've had the pleasure of being a professor with him. In fact, I was appointed professor of economics at IIT against the teeth of opposition of the entire left wing, because Manmohan Singh was the chairman of the selection committee. And then when I was commerce minister, he was my economic advisor. And I can say that he was an excellent economic advisor, and he should have remained so. But to blame him is fine, that he is not the prime ministerial quality, agreed. But I'm always been concerned that if we force him to resign, who is going to come after him? And if a moron comes and occupies the chair, whom in Hindi I call as Buddhu, who otherwise shall remain unnamed, not to embarrass the audience. So I would say the greatest contribution Manmohan Singh has made in 10 years is that he did not resign and saved the nation of a worse fate than his being the Prime Minister. Because the same factor would have operated out of one house instead of across two houses, Racecourt Road and Tentapat. Would have been the same house, the same thing would have happened. I have written a foreword to the book, so I was told don't talk of the book. Talk about the agenda for the next government. That Guru Murthy should have been asked, because he is the brain controlling all the things that are happening in BJP. No? I am quite confident that BJP will come to power with an absolute majority. I didn't join the BJP because they are coming to power, but because I am an old Jansangi, and I was waiting for Gurumurthy to give me permission to join. And finally, when he did, I did. Now, if we are going to talk about the agenda for the new government, at the present moment, I can only rely on one area where my advice has been sought, and that is by a committee headed by Nitin Gadkari, who has been entrusted with the task of working out a vision document. What is the vision of the new government about the future? So he wrote me a letter seeking my views on the draft that he has prepared. He has prepared a very good draft, very, very extensive PowerPoint presentation. And so I had participated in the extent that I gave him my comments and what he could add and subtract. So with that in view, and my confidence that the BJP is going to form the government, I'll give you some, I can't give the whole thing because it'll take a long time, but I will give you the main points of what the agenda could be and should be and probably will be part of the vision document. First of all, we have the problem of fixing the economy, which is in a terrible state. For me, that's not new, because when I originally became the cabinet minister, in fact the senior most cabinet minister for commerce and law and justice, we inherited an economy. At that time, Gurumurthy was on the other side. He was with the previous government, VP Singh government. You made a mess of it, and we fixed it. Partially fixed it, and the real credit for fixing it really goes to Narasimha Rao, whom everybody seems to have forgotten. I hope a future government will honor him for his singular contribution. I have seen it firsthand, because first he wanted me to join Congress party, and he said he would make me a minister of a very powerful portfolio. Then I went and asked Paramacharya, shall I join Congress party? He said, Vendave Vanda. And when I asked him again, saying that then I won't be a minister, he said, Pota minister la. You are not to join. Today, I think that's the best advice I ever received in my life. Thank God I am not in Congress party. So Narasimha Rao appointed a commission, gave me a cabinet rank, and it was a little painful for me because he gave me a cabinet rank with my for the commission on GATT, what is called as Labour Standards and International Trade, and he housed it in the Commerce Ministry. Now I had a cabinet rank. The minister at that time had a minister of state rank with independent charge. So the immediate tension began, because the minister wanted me to call on him. He sent his secretary to say I should call on the minister. And I said, but he is the only minister of state, how can I call on him? The name of the minister was P. Chidambaram. So you know the origins of where it all started. So at that time we had only one problem, and that problem was foreign exchange shortage. We were about to declare bankruptcy. That is, we are going to default on payments. We would have then been declared as a bankrupt nation by the international agencies. The reason was that when Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister, he liberalized imports. The original Soviet model, which came from 1950, discouraged foreign trade. But he then allowed industrialists to import. And he said that because if you take loans from abroad and then buy what you want, then you will get automatically permission to do so. So all the industrialists who had been starved of raw materials and shortages of spare parts and so many, they went and placed huge orders abroad for buying new machines, spare parts, etc., and took loans from abroad, which was the easiest to get, which is short-term loan, which became payable in 5 years. So, but the machine had a long gestation lag in producing results. So by 1990, when I became minister, the loans all became due. We never had foreign exchange reserves as a policy because the Soviet model didn't believe in export-import, so there was no question. And there was foreign exchange rationing and so on in those days. So we suddenly found that all these loans became due for payment, and we didn't have money. And then Chandrasekhar asked me, what can we do? Anywhere you turned, they said no, condition this, condition that. So finally he told me that, we can't take a loan from abroad with conditions. You find some way. Fortunately at that time, when he told me this, I came back to my office, I found the American ambassador sitting, waiting for me. And I asked him what brings him. He said, President Bush has decided to, that is the senior Bush, decided to go to war over the Iraq, Saddam Hussein's capture of Kuwait. And we need to bring planes from Philippines. They can't fly all the way to Saudi Arabia. So therefore we would like to fuel in India. So suddenly the idea struck me. I said, how much will you pay if I permit you to make the landing? Of course he came after Chandrasekhar told him go and talk to me. So I had the full authorization to do or not to do. So he said, we'll give you 3 times the amount that you would charge a commercial plane for landing and refueling and so on. I told him that's not possible because you are asking us to change policy. We have never allowed American planes to land in a war effort. So you're asking us to make a great policy change. So you should give a little more. So he asked me, how much do you think you need? So I said the country needs $2 billion without condition. And not from you, but from the IMF, because you don't want to take it from America. So he said, IMF, what we have got to do with the IMF? So I said, you have 87% of the voting strength in IMF. See, the IMF, the vote is not one nation, one vote, one nation. It is how much contribution you make. So America, Japan, all these put together account for 87% of the donation to the IMF. So 87% of the vote. So I said you can use your 87%. In the history of IMF, they have never given a loan without condition. So I said, but you can make an exception. You want this plane to land, then you have to do this. Now, the American ambassador cursed me. He said, I always knew to give you an American education was the wrong thing. I said, why? He said, because you think like us. So he said, but there's only one problem. Today is Friday, and when do you want it? I said, Monday. He said, oh, on Friday I can do it. I said, no, in Washington it is Thursday night, so you got the whole of Friday. On Monday morning, $2 billion arrived without condition. That project survived. I'm giving you this because, having been in the saddle, all problems are soluble. They have solutions in a combination of politics and economics. And that's what you need. Today, number one problem for rectification, this rupee slide. What is wrong with it? Why is it happening? They say, no, it's international, this, that, America is wanting money. Oh, that's all rubbish. There are 3 explicit reasons for this decline. The first is that our politicians who are corrupt and in power are feeling scared that they may not come back to power. And then there's already a committee called Action Committee Against Corruption in India, so on which Gurumurthy and I are both together. At least on one place we are together. That's a good thing. And this committee and Ramdev, everybody is going to pay for blood of these politicians. So all of them are dumping the containers of cash that they have in the Hawala market. And therefore, this supply of rupees is increased, and therefore this decline has taken place. Because when the supply of rupees increases and the availability of dollars is less, then naturally the price of rupee will go up. This is reason number one. Reason number two is that the country is bleeding in its exports-import balance, what is called the current account deficit. It's a huge difference. And why is that? Because we invented a fiscal instrument about which Venkatesh has written about, and he has understood the instrument very well. It's called a derivative, which is called participatory note. And almost more than 2/3 of our money in foreign investment comes through that. And what is this instrument? It's only available in India, nowhere else. Only for Indian citizens you can get participatory note. Participatory note is issued to you if you are an Indian citizen by Morgan Stanley and US Fidelity Investments and so on. If you are an Indian citizen, you go to your Switzerland bank, you withdraw some money, and you take that and put it on the counter of, say, Morgan Stanley, and say, give me a participatory note of an equivalent amount. Then the company will say, where's your Indian passport? You show your Indian passport, and that's easy to get. Even if you're not an Indian passport also you can get. Many terrorists do that M.K. Narayanan had pointed it out. And they will give you a piece of paper which is called a participatory, nice, very nice looking one on very good paper, but it will not have any serial number, it will not have any name. Just the amount will be there. It's like a currency. Just the amount will be there. So you take that participatory note and bring it to India, make a photostat copy and give it to the Reserve Bank. They'll give you a small receipt, which you take to the stock market and you give it to the stockbroker and he will invest. Naturally, if you bring large amounts, the stock shares will shoot up. When it reaches a certain height, you think that's about as high it will go, you sell. The difference in the price you bought the low price stock and the final price, that is given to you by the stockbroker in rupees. You take the rupees to the Reserve Bank and say, please give me dollars, because under the scheme, if you bring money by participatory notes and make investments and earn on it, all that is convertible in dollars. So you converted it in dollars, and then you take it abroad, and you are now taking it abroad in white. This idea occurred to Chidambaram and Ms. Sonia Gandhi, because they found that their accounts in Switzerland, they were not getting interest on the deposit. They were being charged a service charge. That means 2% being cut out. And the Swiss people were so smart that they took 2% service charge and took that money and invested in the American bond market and got 4%, 6% for doing without any work on Indian money. We have, one estimate says, $1.5 trillion abroad of Indians in illegal bank account. We can bring it back. That should be a task of the government. $1.5 trillion means multiplied by 7, that means what? 105 lakh crore rupees. 105 lakh crore rupees. What is the total tax bill of India? 4 lakh crore rupees. 105 lakh crore rupees comes back to India. How many years? 25 years you don't have to pay tax. And this is not only income tax. Income tax, indirect tax, excise tax, sales tax, all that combined. 4.5 lakh crores. And you can finance it by that. There is a way of doing it. I will explain it in a brief moment. But this is how it's happened. Now there was one problem that was raised, I believe by Ms. Sonia Gandhi to Chidambaram, that you see, when you make so much money in the stock market, you have to pay capital gains tax, and that is 30%. So is there any way to get around that? So they came up with a bright idea that if you invest in Mauritius and create a company there, and the company comes here and invests, and how much money do you need minimum to form a company in Mauritius? $1. So $1 company come here and that invests. You own the $1, so you are 100% owner of that company, and you invest in the stock market. Then, because Mauritius is a poor country, and very friendly to us, lots of expat Indian immigrants there, etc. So the government passed a law saying that any investment in the stock market or anywhere by Mauritius companies is exempt from capital gains tax. So you have to pay 30%, but not Mauritius company. That's why I found in 2G that so many companies had offices in Mauritius. Not only in Mauritius, but in the same street of Mauritius. Not only in the same street of Mauritius, in the same building of Mauritius. Not only in the same building, but in the same room also. It's a dud address. I found this in 2G. All of them have got it. Because Mauritius means you are exempt from all kinds of tax. So this money comes in. Plus participatory note money if you bring, it's called hot money, and therefore it can leave any time. It's not like FDI that you buy shares and then you have to sell the shares and then repatriate the money. There's a process. But here it is just simply decide, I am going out, you go. And lot of participatory money has gone out. Therefore they have dumped rupees and taken dollars and gone out, and that is another reason for the fall. And the third reason is that there is a powerful minister who makes financial policy, whose son sits in Singapore all the time. Sometimes in London, but mostly in Singapore. And he does short selling. Short selling is equivalent to currency forward trading. He says, next week, you give me $1 and I'll pay you, and I'm required to pay you back this $1. That means 60 rupees, say. And a week later, I will give you back this $, 60 rupees plus maybe 1 rupee as your profit, or 2 rupees. The short selling is based on the principle that in 1 week's time the price of the rupee will go from 60 rupees to $1 to 65 or 68. So therefore, without any money in your pocket, you borrowed, this is again called a derivative principle, you borrowed $1, pledged it that you will return it in 1 week's time, and then you make a killing because you will get, say, 8 rupees extra, which you will give 1 or 2 rupees back, and the remaining is pure profit. And people are making in crores and crores, not even crores, 10,000 crores, 20,000 crores, like that. But you got to make sure that the price doesn't fall below 60. Then you are finished. And how can you make sure? The Reserve Bank must listen to you. The Finance Ministry should listen to you. That they shouldn't come out with some policy, like for instance the Finance Ministry wants to reduce the rupee-dollar ratio. All they have to do is they got $277 billion in foreign exchange. You take out 20 and put it in the market in one day. It will come down to 50 immediately. But you got to make sure that the Reserve Bank will not do that. You got to make sure that the finance minister will be able to tell the Reserve Bank governor you can't do it. And to make sure of that, you better be the son of the finance minister. That's the only way. So if you arrest the Hawala people, 5-6 prominent ones, for doing illegal, it is what they're doing. Hawala is illegal activity. You start questioning those who are doing short selling in Singapore. It's very well documented. And you abolish participatory notes. The rupee rate, in my opinion, will come down to 25 rupees to $1. This is my prediction. If a government is determined to do it, it can do it within 6 months, because you don't want to give too much of a shock. You can do it in stages. In any case, when people see that you are coming that way, most of the crooks will start running away. So therefore, this has a solution. And in my opinion, this is an important one. And as a consequence, you have to take some other measures which restore the confidence of the public that something is happening. Not that it will happen tomorrow, it will filter down. No, not that way. I had suggested this to Narasimha Rao. I told him, listen, you're making one mistake, because he took the blueprint from me. I had prepared it for the Chandrasekhar government. We adopted it on 11th of March 1991 in the cabinet. On 12th of March, Chandrasekhar resigned and the government fell. So we could not implement it. The first thing Narasimha Rao asked me is, give me that blueprint. I gave it to him. Now, I had told him, this country, vested interests have built themselves into the woodwork. If you deregulate, they'll all lose money right away. Supposing you say no license needed, all the touts on licenses will become poorer. If you say no quotas needed, then again same problem. Hey, this Soviet model period of 50 years or 40 years up till 1990 had built a new army of touts. And in order to be effective as touts, they became members of the Congress party. And as a consequence, they became ministers. So therefore, I said, if you do this and not have something for the people, they'll do a propaganda, the rich people, because the business houses started celebrating when there was no quota, no license. They all started celebrating. The bureaucrats were very unhappy. That's why I'm glad we gave a couple of books to the bureaucrats today, because they also need to read and write. I was approached by the civil servant who was the controller of exports and imports, very powerful office in those days, now it's abolished. He told me, sir, you are wanting to do away with all these export controls and import controls. Do you know that businessmen will stop coming to your office to ask for favors? This was the attitude. You can control people through these things. So I said, they were going to be very unhappy with you. So I said, do two things. One, very easy. I said, abolish income tax. I said, the rich don't pay income tax because they got chartered accountants. You have a chartered accountant too, no? They don't pay any income tax. In fact, Dhirubhai Ambani paid his first income tax in 1996. And G.D. Birla's annual income shown for almost all his life was 18,000 rupees a year. Well, if you can have a good meal for 2 rupees, then you can certainly survive on 18,000 a year. But anyway, the rich don't pay much income tax. They either have chartered accountants or they can bribe the income tax officer. They get away. The poor don't have enough money to qualify. It's the middle class, salaried class, professional class, doctors, lawyers, opinion makers in the country. I said, they must get something directly. When they see the industrialists celebrating, they shouldn't feel that we are not getting it. You abolish income tax. In those days, income tax is only 2% of the total revenue collected. Today is a little more. But I said, when you, or if you don't want to do income tax abolition, you just say, anybody who saves money out of his income in recognizable form like bank deposits, share certificates, etc., that entire amount is deductible for income tax. 100% deductible. Then I said, our people, after all, today, even today, we can pride ourselves that the biggest savers of India are the households. It's not the corporate sector. Something like 85-86% of the total savings in our country, national saving in the country, is provided by households who religiously save for their children's education, for their daughter's marriage, blah, blah, all kinds of expenditures which they are saddled with from the beginning. And to meet that, they save money. They scrimp and save, they save. And they will be thrilled. And they will feel, yes, something is happening. You say more is coming, but this is immediately. And I said, there is a great project which will generate employment. Link all the rivers of India. Start the project. You will start digging canals, water will start flowing, places like Rayalaseema will get water. So there will be a feeling of participation of the rural India. But he was confident, no, he can manage. You see, Narasimha Rao, had all kinds of luck, but in this he didn't have a luck. He lost the election because the vested interests ganged up on him and convinced everybody that this man is for the rich man. That's why he lost. But he had pushed his luck too far. When he became Prime Minister, there was an expectation that Rajiv Gandhi's assassination will produce a sympathy wave. But unfortunately, the elections were organized in stages. So by the time Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, 3 stages were already over. And in those stages, Rajiv Gandhi did quite badly. But in the last one, he did very well. So they ended up with 240 seats. And the Congress was asked to form the government. I can tell you from personal knowledge, because I was minister then and Rajiv Gandhi was a great friend of mine. We had a coalition government earlier with him. So I had a lot of interaction with Congress party. The original idea was to swear in Sonia Gandhi as Prime Minister. Then the family said, you see, this minority government you will won't be able to run with your experience. So let's appoint a very sick old man as Prime Minister. And then we will break some parties and get a majority, then we'll bring you in. But the problem was that Narasimha Rao, the moment he became Prime Minister, his health began to improve. And he won't die. So for a moment they tried. Sonia Gandhi herself asked Narasimha Rao to step down from the presidentship of the party. He said, no, your mother-in-law didn't do that, and Jawaharlal Nehru didn't do that, Rajiv Gandhi didn't do that, your husband didn't do that, and that's the Congress tradition. I will not give up. So all this hostility to Narasimha Rao comes out of all that. But in this, he pushed his luck. And all the other reformers in India also pushed their luck this way. Chandrababu Naidu did wonderful work. Last, because he didn't allow for this lag factor. Rich people immediately saw their benefit, but the poor people didn't experience anything. So we have to design our economic reforms in such a careful way that the middle class, the most vocal class of India, feels change is coming. Some small change comes, then they get satisfaction, yes, more is coming. And then something should keep coming. Your design of reforms is going to be very important for the future. And I would say that that is the basis for the next agenda. What is the strength of the Indian economy? The strength of the Indian economy is the potential we have. Look at the population. Thanks to the Indian obstinacy in the 1975-77 period, when they refused, they threw the government out on an issue of forcible castration or whatever, sterilization. And as a consequence, the Indian population has been slowing, but slowing in a slow pace. The Chinese went in for this one-child family, forcibly. And today, the average age of China is 37. What is the average age of India? 26. Over 70% of our population is today below 35 years. This is the crowd if properly educated, would produce the innovations necessary for liberating the Indian economy. Today we are all the time complaining about oil. Petrol prices are being raised every day. I don't think petrol prices should be raised because most of it is taxes. It's not the cost of petrol anymore. But I would say that there is now a substitute for petrol, and that's called hydrogen fuel cells. The Americans have cracked that. They can commercialize it, but they won't because they got an abundance of oil. Now they found shale oil also. And the oil companies are powerful people in America, so they say no research on this. No further, no application. The Japanese have made some feeble attempts to run 1 or 2 Toyota cars on hydrogen fuel cells. But India has also done the research. And we have Indians in America who have been part of the advanced team there. We can convert automobile, trucks, all these running on this new fuel source which is called hydrogen fuel source, and that's their young people population. Same way, you've got 60% of the world's thorium. Of course, you better move fast because they are all picking up the sand and sending it to America, and America is storing Indian sand because all thorium is available on sand, and that's why this sand mining has become such an attractive proposition. So, thorium, 60% of the world thorium. Uranium going to be exhausted in 2050. Thorium is the cleanest nuclear fuel. But it's a process by which you, three-stage process by which you can make it into fissile plutonium or plutonium or plutonium to drive a reactor. And therefore, first and second during Baba's time we did. The third one, no, very little investment. Saying, no, we'll think about it later. After the Indo-US nuclear agreement, zero now for thorium research and development. That should be restored. Top priority for thorium-based nuclear reactors for our country. Power systems will be full of power. We will not have power problem anywhere in the country. It's a clean source. Then look at our agriculture. It's the largest employer today, and we are the luckiest people in the world because we can grow crops 3 times a year. All around the 12 months you can grow crops in agriculture. America 5 months snowfall, you can't. Europe also 4 months, you can't. China 3 months, you can't. But India is one country which can grow agricultural crops 12 months of the year, and only 25% of our land grows more than one crop. We can grow 3 crops, provided you focus on that. And I think this should be another part of the agenda. Focus on making agriculture a bounty, producing food grains. A little green revolution. I mean, what is green revolution? 10% of the farmers got the benefit of water and seeds and so on, and we became from food borrowing country to a food surplus country. And if we go in for agriculture with this scientific mind, we will feed the whole world. And let me tell you another thing. The agricultural product prices today is amongst the lowest in the world. Take the price of rice. What's the price in Japan? 7 times India's. What's the price in South Africa? 6 times that of India. These are all nearby countries. Prices in Europe also several times, both wheat and rice. Sugar. Milk. The price of milk in Europe is 15 times that of India. And we have the world's largest population of cows. Only thing, the yield is poor. The Indian cow gives you 200 liters per year, and we are 150 million cows. Israel cow produces 11,000 liters per year. So imagine if our 150 million cows started producing 11,000 liters, then you'll have to go around swimming in Mylapore, not walking. bottle it, send it abroad. Of course, we need an agreement for which this WT or Doha agreement. That can be worked out by deals, give and take, been done. India is a land of potential, even on resources. If you had auctioned the spectrum, you would have got 1,76,000 crores at least. Everybody said, oh, it is now all bogus, Vinod Rai's bogus figures. In fact, Kapil Sibal went to the extent of saying zero. I don't blame him because he can't count beyond zero. So, but you see how much we got. The spectrum licenses sold cheap, we got 17,000 crores as revenue. What is the price in 2008? You see, suddenly they developed a love for the NDA government and said, we will give spectrum at the price the NDA government gave. But NDA government had auctioned the spectrum license. That time there were only 4 crores mobile sets. And they auctioned it and the price turned out to be 1680 crores. In 2008 we had 700 million, that is 70 crore mobile sets. Big demand. Everybody clamming. 522 companies applied for licenses. If you had auctioned it, you would have got 10 times. So instead of 17,000 crores, you would have got 10 times that, which is 1,70,000 crores. So Vinod Rai was perfectly right. But what did the companies which got it cheap do? They sold it to foreign companies at 8 times the price. Swan Telecom, which was not even a telecom company, it was a real estate company. He sold it for 8 times to Etisalat. Unitech, another real estate company, sold it to Telenor for 8 times the price. Tata sold it to Docomo, not all of it, half of their license. They sold it to Docomo for 13 times the price. Similarly, Videocon sold it to, I think the Russians, the Sistema, for 14 times. All of them sold part of the license, the whole of their licenses to foreign companies and made a huge bounty. Of course, they didn't keep all the bounty themselves, they had to give money. So Raja got some, not all. No? I have told I'm a prosecutor, I'm a deemed public prosecutor in the 2G. That's why no one will escape, I can tell you that. Whatever the newspapers may say. I'm waiting for CBI to do its job. When they are finished, whatever is left over, I will take over. I found that Raja got only 4 crores. Only 4,000 crores. That's nothing nowadays, 4,000 crores. Chidambaram also got 5,000 crores. Karunanidhi, because he has a bigger family, he has three wives, no? So he got 15,000. And Sonia Gandhi and family got 36,000 crores. Look at the staggering numbers. I've been saying this in all public platforms. They can't challenge me. Because they challenge me, they'll have to come on the witness box and I'll prove everything. Not only this, something else. So 1,76,000 from Spectrum. Coal, if you had auctioned it, how much you have got? 11 lakh crores. If you had auctioned the oil fields of Krishna Godavari, how much you have got? 24 lakh crores. Where is the shortage of money? If you price it properly, you get all the money you want. Why can't you? If you are giving natural resources away, why should you give it to foreigners or industrialists at cheap price? When they are not going to pass it on, they are going to then profit on it. So therefore, there is no shortage of money. The country, economically, in my opinion, when I first came to the Jansangh, which was the forerunner of the BJP, I was asked to prepare a economic plan. And I prepared a plan called Swadeshi plan. That you don't need foreign aid from these governments. You can stand on your own feet. You don't have to grow at 3.5% per year. You can grow at 10% per year. And I wrote it in the form of a book. Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee presented it in Parliament in the budget session. Mrs. Gandhi was the finance minister. She was holding the finance portfolio at that time. And she read the book and she was livid. Because I had attacked socialism, I had attacked the Soviet Union. I said Soviet Union itself is failing. In fact, the people used to do propaganda that Soviet Union, there is no unemployment, there is no poverty, there is no inflation. The only truth is there is no Soviet Union now. Gone. Where is the Soviet Union? 16 countries. So she got upset and she attacked me. And I thank her for it because she made me famous overnight. I was unknown till then. And she said he's Santa Claus, he's handing out 10% growth rate, atom bomb, this, that, and launched my political career. So that plan, I'm telling you, at that time also people thought this is not possible. Today we have seen growing at 9%. We can grow at 13%, 14%. If we bring in efficiency in the use of resources, that means getting rid of corruption. And corruption can be got rid of. It requires three things. Short term, bring in e-governance. If now railway reservation, not that much corruption. You want to get a form from a collectorate, much less now because you can download many of the forms. So that's short run, streamline the system. Second is catch big people, don't catch small people, that later on. Catch big people, send them to jail. And once that process starts, confidence will be, and people will begin to feel if such people can be caught, what will happen to us? And there will be a total change in climate. And finally, I will say the third long-term one. People misunderstand me when I say it but I don't know any other religion except Hindu religion. I say the values of Sanatan Dharma. Today corruption is due to greed. And the one thing that Sanatan Dharma teaches you is that don't have greed. That is why we have never elevated money as an indicator of social status. When I was a student at Harvard, people used to ask me how you Indian people can follow Mahatma Gandhi. I said, why? Because he doesn't wear clothes properly. He's hardly dressed. So I thought about it. I said, your country leaders have to be very well dressed. He said, absolutely, top. They must be dressed in the best suit. Their shoes should be shining. Their tie should be top class. And in fact, they told me that when Nixon and Kennedy had a debate, Nixon turned up without shaving. And they had what is called as a 5 o'clock shadow. He lost the television debate on that account only, that he was not properly dressed. And of course, Kennedy came after going to a beauty parlor, so he looked great. So that matters in the United States. But in India, it doesn't matter how you dress. Jayaprakash Narayan used to be simply dressed. Even their religious leaders are dressed in pomp and show. Look at Pope, he'll always be in a satin gown with diamond and sapphire and ruby necklaces around his neck and jewels in his topi. But our Swamijis, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, such a great scholar. But when you see his clothes, you say, my God, is this man such a great... the foreigner will say that. But ultimately, the message of this Sanatan Dharma is that you must have material progress harmonized with spiritual advancement. And that beyond a point you should not accumulate. And that is what has produced the happiness in our country. Foreigners are coming to all our ashrams. You ask them, why are you coming? All rich people. Go to Rishi Ravi Shankar's or Ramdev's or Swami Dayananda Saraswati's ashram. See how many foreigners there. What is their problem? Their physical problems are all solved. They've got enough money to live comfortably. But they are not happy. That we are able to teach. That's why there are now yoga teachers in every town of the United States. People are learning Gita, their propagation. There's a big demand. I tell people jokingly that when I go to America, people start chasing me because my name is Swami. They think I must be a sadhu. They come for a lecture, we want to hear about Gita. So, this is spreading like that. There are many things about India which are now spreading. Ayurveda, you will find that Americans love curry today. Not because they like the spice or anything. But their medical research says that what you call haldi, in English haldi, manjal, turmeric. Turmeric prevents Alzheimer's disease. They did a research. Harvard Medical School with the Israelis did a research. Why Indians have such a low incidence of Alzheimer's disease? And they found that ultimately it is this turmeric. So now you can go to a department store there and you will see turmeric bottles. People are even swallowing turmeric bottles without realizing that you should take it in small doses. So Sanskrit, today NASA has required Sanskrit as compulsory. Why? Because they have found that in the most advanced field of computer science is called artificial intelligence, and this you can see from Google, just by googling NASA and Sanskrit. They say the most computer friendly language is Sanskrit. And they have made it compulsory. The English schools are teaching Sanskrit. George Bush, before going, declared that any college teaches Sanskrit, they will get special federal grants. But even in India, if you say, they'll say, oh, you are communal, huh? This is the thing that we have to change. So that brings me to 2 points in the end. Taken a long time, but a few more minutes. You see, economic development is worth it if you can defend it. If you grow crops and you can't defend some brigands coming and harvesting and going away, then why you must grow crops? You've built a beautiful economy, then you must be able to defend it. That means national security. And you must understand, national security means strength. You can't defend unless you have strength. You see, just by being civilized you cannot be. The great Raja, one of our great Rajas, forgave Muhammad Ghori 17 times, Prithviraj Chauhan. Maybe 16 times, I don't know the exact number, but he forgave him long time, because that was our tradition. If you lose the war and you apologize, you forgive him and say, jao, take everything back with you. But that was not applicable to the force that came. And in fact, Rama, when he killed Bali by hiding behind the tree, before dying, Bali said, hey Kshatriya Putra, you are supposed to be Maryada Purushottam. You hide behind a tree and kill me? Why can't you come face to face before me and do it? So Ram said, who are you to teach me morality? You stole the wife of Sugriv. You ran away with his kingdom. And you are giving me lectures on morality? Morality is only between two moral persons, not between an immoral and moral person. Swami Chinmayanand used to say that we suffer from Arjuna disease. Sitting in the battlefield, shall I kill him, not kill him? Karna is trying to get his chariot out. Krishna says, kill him. So how can I am Kshatriya? I can't kill him like when he's kneeling down. He said, yeah, when you took off your wife's sari, that time he was a Kshatriya or what? Kill him now. So therefore our dharma is very clear. When it comes to defending your nation, when it comes to dharma, that is the objective that is most important. Not talk about peace and chant peace and so on. You are all the time complaining that the Chinese are crossing into your borders. They are all TVs there. The Chinese watch it and enjoy it. The Indians screaming and jumping up and down. Now, if they do that, you have to retaliate. There will be a war. Well, that's why you got an army, to fight a war. But you don't have to fight them in Aksai Chin. You develop the naval base in Car Nicobar, which is called Indira Point. It used to be called some Pygmalion Point or something before. Huh? Yeah, you can always pick it up, that's not a problem. From there to Sumatra, which is Indonesia, not a very friendly country to China, is only 90 kilometers. But 90% of Chinese traffic for freight, goods, pass through that. So make a deal with Indonesia, that we both of us don't like China. So let us control this. And if the Chinese do some pinching in Aksai Chin, shut down that canal. And tell them, okay, because China can't defend itself there. It's an Indian Ocean, they are much weaker than us. So that way we have to do. Same thing with Pakistan. I mean, they chop off your soldiers' heads, we are not able to respond. What impact it has on our soldiers? They die for you, they expect at least honor. But just now he is going to meet Nawaz Sharif in New York. Who is Nawaz Sharif? Prime Minister of Pakistan. Well, that way, yes, these two Prime Ministers are fit for each other. Because Nawaz Sharif is a stooge of the ISI, military and the Taliban. He made a deal with them and came to power. None of his candidates were killed during the elections. He cannot even read the newspaper in the morning unless he gets permission from the Taliban. And the Taliban has said that India is an unfinished chapter of Islamic history. What does that mean? That wherever Islam went to Iran, Zoroastrians were ruling, took it over, cut them to pieces, and the whole Iran became, Persia became Iran and 100% Islamic. Neighboring two countries, Mesopotamia and Babylon, later on became Iraq. In 17 years, they made them 100% Muslim. They went to Egypt, 21 years, 100% Muslim. Christians went to Europe, 50 years, 100% Christian. But here, 800 years of Muslim rule, 200 years of Christian rule through the British, and we are still 80% Hindu. There's something fantastic. So it's an unfinished chapter of Islam. I don't blame Muslims because their mind is very clear. But they blame me because my mind is clear, they call me communal. I am not against Muslims. I say if any Muslim says that my ancestors are Hindus, he is part of my family. But if you say your ancestors are Gori and Ghazni, then we have created a new country for you, go there. How can you claim to be the descendant of Gori and Ghazni? It is not backed by DNA data. I have got DNA studies, genetic studies which show that all Indians, whether he is a Brahmin or a scheduled caste, whether he is a Hindu or a Muslim, they are all the same DNA. We are one nation. All this bogus thing are still in our books saying that there is Aryan and Dravidian. Only Karunanidhi believes it. Nobody else believes it. So this should be also part of our agenda, to rewrite the history book and new textbooks in our classes. You see, there are many things we are so defensive about. This Babri Masjid, they say Ram temple, no, this is communal. No, this is between two religions. How is it between two religions? First of all, masjid in Islamic law, Shariat, verified by me from Saudi Arabia, is not a religious place. It is a building to facilitate reading of namaz, and namaz can be read anywhere, including on this floor, on an aeroplane, anywhere they can read it. It's just to facilitate reading of namaz. And is there a law, Indian law on that? Yes, Supreme Court, Constitutional Bench, 1994. What does it say? That masjid is not a religious place. In the British India, this is what the judgment says. In British India, the British government demolished many masjids. The Saudi Arabians have demolished the masjid where Muhammad used to read his namaz, Bilal Masjid in Makkah. So I said to the Muslim community, you are part of us. So this Brindavan, Ram, Ayodhya and Kashi Vishwanath, these three places you vacate, I'll build you a masjid somewhere else. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a masjid, you have it, but some other place. These must be restored. They are the most holy of our temples, and they must be restored. And I like to see this as part of the agenda. And actually, when Chandrasekhar was Prime Minister, I had entered into negotiations with Saeed Shahabuddin, who was Babri Ashram in my committee. He only said one thing, prove to me that there was a temple before, and I will myself go and demolish that masjid. So we couldn't do it, our government fell. But the NDA government time, the Allahabad High Court set up a commission. They used satellite imaging and they found out that there is a temple, and now it is accepted in the Allahabad High Court judgment also that that is a temple. A temple is always a temple. Why? Because of Prana Pratishtha Puja. And the Prana Pratishtha Puja means the Lord resides there. Therefore, nobody is owner of that place. In the case of a masjid, there is an owner. He is called Mutwali. And Babri Masjid, by the way, is not a Shia masjid. It is not a Sunni Muslim masjid. It's a Shia masjid. And the Shia Mutwali, it is a family responsibility. The man who is today the Shia Mutwali of Babri Masjid has given it in writing, we don't want that place, you give us some other place. It's the Sunnis who are creating problems, saying no, Waqf property, this, that, etc. But temple once demolished will always be a temple whether it's demolished or not, whether it's puja or not. When I was law minister, this happened when there was a Nataraj's murti which was taken by a farmer, discovered it buried below the ground. He took it out and he assumed that one of the temples which had been closed down in Tanjavur, it belonged to that. These touts came, they bought it from him, took it to England and decided to auction it for 5 million pounds. And that time I was in government, we fought it, and the House of Lords judgment says that it is now well established that once a temple is built according to the Prana Pratishtha Puja, it shall remain a temple whether it's in use or not, and return that Nataraj statue to us. That judgment is there. So I would say this mindset, you see, is responsible for today's terrorism. They are very clear. They want to complete the chapter of Islamic invasion of India. And that's what they're doing in Kashmir. What have they done in Kashmir? 5 lakh Kashmiri Pandits. What is their fault except that they are Hindus? Driven out. So we have to do something about that. We can't send them back just now. Instead of that, we should send some proxies. Ex-servicemen who still can fight, give them weapons and money and say, go and settle in Kashmir. Article 370 cannot come in the way because the terrorists have broken the Article 370. Article 370 says you can't disturb the religious composition. So by driving out the Kashmiri Pandits, you have disturbed the religious composition. So therefore I will also disturb it, or rather restore it, by sending people there. These are the ways where when you retaliate, then you can get safety. Then people will worry. Pakistan is the most fragile country. How can they cut off soldiers' heads and get away with it? If we just retaliate, Pakistan last time broke into 2, this time they'll break into 4. Baluchistan is willing to go, Sindh is willing to go, Pashtunistan is willing to go. Only Punjab will remain. But that we can take care of separately. So I am saying the problem with India is that we do not know our strength and we don't use it. There is a story of Lord Shiva being approached by a snake, saying that the whole village is frightened of me. Whenever I come looking for food, a rat or 2, I find that public all start screaming and running. So what shall I do? He says, because you bite them and kill them. So that's why they do like this. You announce in the village that henceforth I will not bite anybody. And see the difference. After some time, Lord Shiva was going through the forest and he saw this snake lying bleeding, writhing in pain. He said, hey, what happened to you? He said, you told me to announce that I will not bite anyone, and now children are also throwing stones at me and hitting me. What I just did what you did, and this is my state. He said, but I never said don't hiss. You should have hissed when they came to attack you. Just because you don't bite doesn't mean you don't hiss. The same way, just because you don't occupy another country doesn't mean you don't give them a blow or 2. That should be our defense policy. I say this is all because of Jawaharlal Nehru not allowing the Vivekananda given identity to modern India. This country is a land of Hindus and those others who acknowledge that their heritage, their ancestors are Hindus. We are not against anyone staying in this country, but the identity of an Indian has to be clearly established that this is the identity of the Indian. Americans, you see, Professor Samuel Huntington has defined the American identity as white, Anglo-Saxon, Christian, Protestant, English-speaking people. Somebody asked him, what about those black Africans and these Asians, Koreans and Indians and so on? He said, yeah, they are citizens of the United States. But the identity of India is white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, etc. Same thing just now, Prime Minister Cameron told the BBC. He said, we are a Christian country and our ethos is Christian. So they said, what about all these Muslims and Asians and Hindus over here? He said, that's all right, they are here living, residing in our country as citizens. But the identity is that. This is the identity of India. Hindustan means the land of Hindus and those others who acknowledge that their ancestors were Hindus. This identity has to be established so that there is no, I am Tamilian, I am Bengali, you are Indian first and Tamilian afterwards. And if there is a clash of Tamil interests and national interests shall prevail, not Tamil interests. I was surprised that the Tamil Nadu Assembly passed a resolution, please don't hang the people who killed Rajiv Gandhi because of Tamil aspirations. What has that got to do with it? Rajiv Gandhi is the Prime Minister of India. He was killed because the LTT didn't like his policy. How can he say Tamil interests? Indian interests, national interests. And I would like to see in this election in Tamil Nadu we fight on the national platform, not on the Tamil platform. And the people, according to me, are ready for it. So there are a large number of areas where a new government can do a lot. But I am saying that time has come because Christians are united and voting unitedly. Muslims are uniting and voting unitedly, although I am trying to separate the Shias, Ahmadiyas, Bohras, Barelvis. I am at work on that. But still the bulk will vote as one. Why Hindus should not vote as one? If they didn't vote as one and voted on merit, I don't mind. But why Hindus should be at a disadvantage and be led by the tail? We are 80%, 20% wants to lead us. How can that be? The Prime Minister says Muslims have the first charge on our resources. Nothing could be worse than that. Still, I don't want him to resign. You know why. So, I am saying today the call, the need of the hour is all we Hindus sink our differences, caste, language, everything, and for once vote for absolute majority, a government which can give you a nationalist platform. And we can do that. In 1977, nobody had, except for Moraji Desai, Charan Singh and myself, only 3 people, and I was too junior anyway to make a difference, but Moraji kept me in his side and he said, you do the talking. In the meeting, mostly people wanted that we boycott the elections in 1977. Because they said, we have no money, our people still in jail, workers are in jail, how can we fight? She's got the power, she's there, she's looking for legitimacy for an emergency. Why should we give the legitimacy by fighting and losing? So Moraji said, no, we need to have an opportunity to go to the people. And even if we lose, doesn't matter, at least we went to the people. Charan Singh took the same stand. And we did go to election. People never thought that the people of India will vote for democracy. But they did. It has got nothing to do with the education. Because if it was education which had decided, educated people voted for democracy, then Tamil Nadu should not have voted for Congress. So this time, Tamilians must do Prayashchitam and vote for a nationalist party in full measure. It's a North Indian illiterate. He is sitting, sipping tea in chai shop, was talking the highest politics. And they didn't give Congress a single seat from Amritsar to Calcutta. And Indira Gandhi herself lost her election. Sanjay Gandhi lost his election. So this country, don't go by this, educated, uneducated. It's the commitment that matters. And today Hinduism is in danger. And let us unite, and our future agenda should be there to create a new Virat Hindu identity for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swami, for this outstanding ovation. And may I request the audience to please give a standing ovation. You know, one can't help but eulogize Dr. Swami to this old block of carbon we call a diamond. There's clarity, there's a lot of consistency. He's a man of high intellect and content-filled. He's very colorful and vibrant, but there's just one part. Here's perhaps a politician who's cut free, so that makes him different. Alas, a single swallow does not a summer make. And I just hope more of us in this audience would be inspired to do our bit to this country, whether it's by our thoughts or, more importantly, by our votes. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Swami.